Welcome to Basketball Association Style. Here with the heartbroken Joel C. Cortez, the scarred veteran of these playoffs. My name is Arky Shea. Joel, Mavs, Celtics, exactly the way we predicted, the same way we predicted it too. It would happen the same. You technically were right as far as your prediction, but as far as the way everything happened, not even close to right. Not for either one. What is good? This is how I know the NBA is not rigged. Because why would the NBA want both these series to go like this? Like they
To go
wouldn't.
so quickly, yeah.
They wouldn't, and they wouldn't want blowouts and game decided. Like they just wouldn't. So, Joel, let's just go ahead and start with your immediate thoughts following the untimely demise of the Anthony Edwards crew.
So, one, I hope I don't have to wait 20 more years to get back to this position because 20 years has been a long, long time.
Yeah.
2004 in the
fair.
KG group. But number two, this was a surprise, legitimately for me. And you mentioned that part of the predictions were right. I did put the Dallas Mavericks in the Western Conference Finals, but I had them against Denver. I did put the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals in my predictions. They are there. So, in that regard,
mean, when we were predicting these individual series, like
yeah.
you picked Dallas still to win, and you picked Boston to win. So you're right.
No, I had Minnesota over. I had Minnesota over Dallas.
I thought you
I had Denver over Minnesota in the second round. I picked Denver in 7 games over Minnesota. But once we got to this, and again, we didn't tape last week before some of this was going on. But yeah, I didn't pick Dallas to get to the finals. I picked Minnesota at that point. I believed that Minnesota would be able to move through Dallas in 6 games, maybe even 5, because the Wolves had not really had a problem with Dallas during the regular season. Minnesota had shown a lot of things during the Denver series. They had shown a lot of things during the Phoenix series and sweeping the Suns team, the one that had given them problems during the regular season. And it just seemed like they continued to get better through these bigger challenges. And Dallas, no disrespect to them, it had a really nice playoffs, but it's like, okay, you beat the Clippers, a team that didn't have Kawhi Leonard for the whole time, only for part of it. They've been really up and down and inconsistent. You beat the Thunder, the number 1 team in the West. That's nice, but the Thunder really weren't the number 1 team in the West most of the way. And they were young and they got exposed. And I just looked at all the different on-paper advantages that Minnesota should have. And I am surprised because not only did they get outplayed, they got thoroughly outplayed. And it's crazy that in game 5, first quarter, near the end of the first quarter, Dallas goes up by 14. That was the largest lead of the entire series up to that point that Dallas had had. 5 games in, yeah, they had only been up by 14 points. But they controlled a lot, a lot during the series. And what the other crazy part, when I look at game 5, it was a blowout. It was a beatdown. It was a butt kicking. It was all those different things. Yes, it was only 21 points at the end. But the crazy thing to me is when you look at the box score, and I know that doesn't always tell a full story, but it tells enough. Minnesota wasn't that far off in rebounds, in turnovers, in assists, you look at any of these metrics, basic as they might be. Shooting percentage, sure. The Mavs shot the lights out at 55%, and they were 44% from downtown. It seemed like in that game, Arky, that they were 90% from the field and 80% from downtown.
Buddy,
like they couldn't miss. Like they couldn't miss. And then Minnesota, on the other hand, shot 43% from the field. That's not great, but that's not getting blown out bad. And 31% from downtown, also not great. But the number of shots is relatively even. In fact, Minnesota got more shots than Dallas got. Free throws was relatively even. But you cannot tell me that the stats tell the story of what the eyeball test showed in game 5. It was ugly.
You're fine. Yeah. I was just trying to think, like, is there a way I could spin that? No, I can't spin that. You're right. Like, it's, to me, it's like when the Knicks got punked out in game 7. It was like, wow, why can't Indiana miss? Like, why is this game, the game that could eliminate them, the game where the other team, like, they cannot miss
and at home
anything? Yeah, and at home, right, you're right. Not to mention that you guys were going after dudes' necks, literally, like you guys were just trying to murder people, which is fun, right? Look, I don't know how much you want to give into that and talk about that, and with it's just especially because the way the series ended up going, right? It's not that it's going to impact anything series wise going forward.
I'll go ahead. I've got thoughts on Dallas, but we'll get to them in a minute.
I was just going to say, like, I'm not surprised that there was a blowout in this series, and I'm not even so surprised that it was in a decisive game. As much as that, I thought it was so decisive after this one. After we had just seen Minnesota sort of get through the wall and sort of maybe, again, 3-0 is tough, 3-1, it's still very tough, but there's a little hanging on going back home, right? You're going back home, you can feel a little bit, good. But home's been a tricky place for Minnesota in the playoffs. Like so I'm a little surprised, even though if I just paid attention to the trends for this playoffs in Minnesota, I maybe should be. But I can't help but be disappointed because I thought Minnesota would win and be the better team. I'm really surprised at how hot Luka and Kyrie were getting in that game and how good they have been in this playoffs for basically the totality of it. Like they essentially did what I think like the Miami Heat have done, which is they're fine, they're good. They get to the playoffs, and a switch just got flipped. And so they just superseded everything I thought Dallas was going to be in this series. I did think they might have a shot at it. I did not think they'd be doing gentleman's sweepage.
For Dallas, it comes down to a few different things. And this also, I think, speaks to how and why Minnesota lost the way that they did. Dallas had two stars that were locked in that, yes, at times absolutely could not miss. But even when they missed shots, they were locked into the game plan. They moved the basketball. They both defended. They were aggressive when they needed to be. They got other guys involved. They thoroughly outplayed, and I don't care what the box score says in any one game, but we all know about Karl-Anthony Towns' struggles. But even with Anthony Edwards, Kyrie and Luka played in command the entire time, and they were in control. And they outplayed Towns and Edwards. But you know what? That's kind of how it should be. Towns and Edwards are on the come up. Edwards is a young guy. Towns has never been on winning teams up to this point, really. I mean, he's been on a couple over the last few years, but not teams in this position before. Kyrie's a champion. Luka's been to the Western Conference Finals 2 years ago. He's been in the playoffs multiple times, and that's just at the NBA level. He is a champion overseas. These two guys are veterans, and they know what they're doing. And then the supporting cast for Dallas, again, executed a game plan from start to finish throughout the series. You never got the sense that Dallas didn't know what to do or what was going on. They were fiery, but they were calm in their execution. Whereas on the other side with Minnesota, and Anthony Edwards kind of said this too, like, you would constantly look at the Wolves and they're looking around as if they don't know what to do, or there's frustration, or there's guys that are hesitating on shots, or especially in game 5, they were playing hard, but it was hard nervous. You could just tell that they were tight. Shots are being released at different points than normal, or rushed, or short-armed. It's all these, the ball's getting lost a little bit on freak turnovers, and those are little things that when you watch body language, and if you've watched the game long enough, you can tell when a team is tight or a player is, and the Wolves were tight going back home. But that was not the first time it had happened in this series. I thought Minnesota, the real big sin was losing your first 2 games at home. Yeah. And you came out way too cool. Way too cool. I don't know if they were believing their own press clippings or what it was after the Denver series, but
that's a great descriptor of it. They were a little too cool for school. They thought they slayed the dragon, right? The defending champ dragon, and thought, all right, well, you got what was the Denver 5 seed? You got this 5 seed coming in here. We run this thing. We got through the biggest obstacle we got to get through. And you got wily veterans. Luka's been, not as deep as Kyrie in the playoffs, but he's gotten himself a couple steps through already. Those dudes, and they got veterans on that team. This team was ready to play, and Minnesota wasn't early. I think that's a really great way to put it. What'd you think of Cat's 3-point barrage? He just wouldn't stop shooting.
So now the
They say
narrative,
shoot or shoot, but come on, Cat.
the rest of the offseason, the narrative is going to be, because it's already started, Stephen A is parroting this now, trade Cat. You know, and anybody who's listened to this show, the dozens of you who have listened to this show, you know that it's been well over a year that I've been saying Cat needs to go. He is the weak link on the progression of this team. He's a talented player. He's a good dude. I've always said that. I respect what he, brought to the table over these years, but he is the weak link, and he has been in the league long enough to try to overcome these things. And it's not just, he didn't shoot well. It was a terrible series shooting wise.
Oh my God.
But then what else did he bring to the table? I know the box score will say he had 28 and 12 in game 5, and game 4 he had a nice game too, but he fouled out a game 4, the game that they won.
Exactly.
The fouls and the defensive issues continue. The offensive fouls continue. And then on top of it, if and when you have games where you go cold, which is going to happen, maybe even entire series where you go cold, what do you do to get out of it? What else do you contribute? Unfortunately, Towns, he is a one-trick pony. He is a very good offensive player in the scoring category, and he's a good passer. But he turns it over. He gets offensive fouls, which are turnovers too, and then defensively, there's just not enough production elsewhere, and he doesn't fit. They tried it with the Gobert and Towns pairing. Towns has been the weak link. Gobert, I know, is not an offensive threat. His box score sucked in game 5. He got outplayed by Daniel Gafford, but Towns got really outplayed by Daniel Gafford. And Gobert just makes more sense with what they have. You need to trade Karl-Anthony Towns for a 3-and-D wing. Mikal Bridges from the Nets would be my dream pick. Send Towns back to the New Jersey area where he's from. Jeremy Grant from Portland is just hanging out there, not doing anything, and would be a nice fit with this team too. There are fits like that. Trade him to the Lakers. I don't care. Put him with Anthony Davis. Put him with LeBron. Give me Austin Reeves. Bring back Jared Vanderbilt, Taurean Prince, and whatever else you can get your hands on. I think that the Wolves with Anthony Edwards playing a massive supersized lineup is nice sometimes, but that's what you have Naz Reid for. You don't need Towns to make that sort of look work. Reid has been the better player, the smarter player. Get a 3-and-D wing and give yourself the ability to go small sometimes too, and a player that's not going to be making so many mistakes. So that's going to be the narrative. Towns is going to get blamed for more than he should because the numbers were damning. I mean, they were bad for the whole series, but I thought Chris Finch got out coached much of this series, or Micah Nori, or both. Finch was hurt and coaching from the back of the sidelines. Dallas had a better game plan. Their guys were ready to play. Stan Van Gundy called this out throughout the series. Why is Minnesota not putting Luka Doncic into rotation defensively? Why are you not running screens that involve Luka coming up and then getting him to be the primary defender? Luka got to camp out defensively on Jaden McDaniels or Kyle Anderson or whoever and just rest possession after possession after possession, rest on the defensive end, and then come back and be able to dominate offensively. That's not how you try to go after him. Kyrie, again, a game defender at this point, but a guy that you should be pushing mismatches, and Dallas never allowed that really to happen. And Minnesota, for whatever reason, did not try to exploit that. But body language-wise, this falls on the coaching staff too. And for the young guys, I do have silver linings, but we'll talk about that in a minute.
Well, I don't really have much else for this except for Naz Reid is a legend killer, or sorry, lively killer. My bad. I'll say this.
And Naz had a bad game 5 too, by the way. He was only 5 points, 2 of 10, 0 of 4. Like he sucked,
there's
just
just a lot of
else did
frustration in that game. That's a lot of frustration in that game. I think there's the second time that Lively took that hit on the back of the neck. Blowout. It's just it's tough. Like when Anthony Edwards is hitting like a near logo 3, cutting it to 30, and everyone's cheering. Like it's a tough game. It's a tough scene for everybody there. If you want to do silver linings, we can go to the Boston moving forward.
Minnesota got real tongue-in-cheek after the Denver win, and they were told about going through steps and how they had kind of advanced a step. And I think it was you who sent me that clip of, Edwards and Towns laughing, going, how much more do we have to lose?
Right.
Like, we've been losing. We've done all these steps. And that's true. They had lost plenty. They had been pushing. They had been a playoff contender over the last 3 seasons. However, if there's a silver lining in this, it's that Minnesota, when they've gotten themselves in trouble this year, has been too cool for school sometimes. That was a major problem last year. And this is another example that you can't do that. Anthony Edwards still he needs to continue diversifying his offensive game. As electric and explosive as it is, you saw that when bottled up by a wall of defenders, and Denver did this to him also, he gets a little bit limited and still falls back into some of those rookie and sophomore year mistakes where he just launches himself into the defense trying to get a call. He will get better. He will continue to improve. But also for Edwards, I think it was exposed, and maybe he was talking too much trash. Like, you want to go after Kyrie Irving and Luka and talking trash before the series has even started might not be a great idea. I don't want to take away that killer edge from Edwards, but when he signed up to be the primary defender on Kyrie, that did not last the whole series, because it kind of showed that as good of a defender as Edwards is, asking him to be the lead defender every possession and then your lead offensive player, especially if the supporting cast is not doing their part and Towns is playing like garbage, Edwards got tired. He had dead legs by the end of nearly every game in this series. And maybe it's the length of the season. He's never played this far in. Whatever it was, you're coming off the 7-game series in Denver. So there's that conditioning that'll continue to happen. There's understanding the pace. There's maybe understanding, like, oh, as superhuman as Ant is, he still is human. And the limit might be, we're going to deploy him as our lead defender situationally, not just because he stepped up, and admirably so, to say, no, I got Kyrie. That may not be realistic on this team with this offense and the way it sputters at times. So you've learned some things. Jaden McDaniels will be a year older next year. So will Naz Reid. So will Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So will Anthony Edwards. That's your young core. Rudy Gobert is still going to have stuff left in the tank next year. We wonder about Mike Conley. He's going to have to go, probably fewer minutes again next season. Towns is the X factor. There are some young guys on the bench who maybe could deserve some more minutes, but I don't know that they're going to step into a situation if you're just trading Towns just to get rid of him. You're going to need something back, but I also am very wary of this team, and I don't know that Tim Connolly, the GM, will do it because he doesn't seem to be super conservative, but there could be that temptation to go, hey, we made it to the Western Conference Finals. Let's just run it back. That would be a mistake. The silver lining here is you had an entire season where Towns and Gobert were relatively healthy. I know Towns missed some time at the end, but you had a large body of work to look at this experiment, see all of the ways that it did work and proved a lot of us wrong, but also I think to see where the ceiling and the limitation is with this idea, and more specifically where the limitation is with Karl-Anthony Towns under a very bright spotlight. You've learned these lessons. The silver lining has to be that you learn and move on now.
You feel pretty strong about that, and you've talked about that throughout the season, preseason. I think I'm going to defer to you. You've seen a lot more of Karl-Anthony Towns with this program than I have, so
I'm not always right. I didn't think Dallas would win. I could be wrong on this one too, but there is a large body of work and a lot of other people saying the same thing at this point too, that I feel pretty confident on this one.
Listen, it's a good thing. It's good that you're not listening to your top player. When Anthony Edwards just was telling tongue in cheek, not so now, to Anthony Edwards, hey, maybe stop fouling everybody. We'll be all right. And then he fouls out again. It's it's clear that Anthony Edwards knows who his guy is. Like, he knows who Karl-Anthony Towns is, and he's just like, dude, just chill out on that. We'll probably be okay for the most part.
And you got to hit some shots, my friend.
What do you got to hit over? Like, what was it like? At one point, it was like, what did I say? At one point, it was like 12 of 48 or something like that. Or
I think he was 31% from the floor in the series, and I may be wrong here, but I'm close. 31% from the floor, 23% from downtown for the series.
From three. So I was thinking, he just kept throwing up threes.
And then Minnesota won 3 home games all playoffs. They got to the Western Conference Finals and only won 3 times at home. Twice was against Phoenix in the sweep, and they beat Denver once at home. Once at home during that 7-game series. So kudos to them for winning some road games. They were a good home team this year. They were a good road team this year, and it was one of the signs of maturation that they were finally protecting home court. But that's another pretty damning statistic when you cannot win at home. And maybe, again, it's something to learn from. It's something you'll get better at. But it is a major thing that needs to change. You're not going to make it very far if you've got no home court advantage. And I don't necessarily think that's a fan thing. Like that's the team learning how to get the fans involved in the game and give them something to actually cheer about.
Boston will be the Dallas Mavericks opponent. And frankly, another series that went much differently than I was expecting. Not in the final result, but the fact that this series should still probably be playing right now. Like, Indiana gave up games, plural, in this series, including one you cannot give up, including game 1 in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, I'll obviously get your thoughts on it, but I'd said before the series, I thought between the two, the Knicks and the Pacers, I thought the Knicks were the better team with healthy to be able to play Boston. The Knicks clearly were far from healthy by the time that series was over. So then to play Boston, I thought Indiana had the chance. And in my defense, Joel C. Cordes, they played them really well for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Like
they had stretches.
Multiple games in this series. And to just drop one in the punch bowl. Like, look, I hate Boston. It's disheartening to sort of watch. I hate Indiana too, to be honest. It's a little disheartening to watch a team like Indiana go through something like that when to me, it felt like you could have lost all the energy off that team after game 1. All of it could have been just sucked out, and it kind of showed a little game 2, but they still played really well, and they still had multiple chances to win multiple games in this series.
Mm-hmm.
Joel, why didn't they?
So I know you're pointing the finger a lot at Indiana, and there were dumb turnovers, there were missed shots, there were times that they got tight. But you look at that roster, and outside of Pascal Siakam, who is a champion and made some runs with the Raptors, but really it's 1 year. The only other guy on the roster playing major minutes who's had some playoff experience is Miles Turner. But those were mostly sweeps during the Nate McMillan era, and Turner never got far into the playoffs during his time there. So this is new territory for them, just like it was for the Timberwolves. When I looked at Boston, a team loaded with guys who have not only been there, but some of them have been there together at this point, namely Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Al Horford, Peyton Pritchard. Those guys have been around together through a couple different iterations of this Celtics team. But Derek White was there in the past, and now you add in Porzingis and that sort of thing. Drew Holiday obviously is a champion too. Boston just never panicked. When they were down 18, it did not change. They just came back the next possession. The 2 times that Indiana got up by that much, it was for like 1 or 2 possessions they were up by 18 points. It's not as if they led for an entire quarter and they had all the momentum. It's like they got to this high water mark and then just continued to go down, and Boston just caught right back up. I was so impressed with the poise that the Celtics played with, possession to possession. And look, when you win 64 games in a season, that means you won a lot of games, but in a lot of different ways. You've been in those situations before to go, oh yeah, I remember back in early February, we were down 18 points. We came back, we can do this. And I know Boston was rarely down this season. That's another part of it too. But all of those guys have been around long enough and in these situations that I think there's that individual and collective knowledge to go, yeah, okay, Indiana's up 18. That's great. We know that team can score, but they don't stop anybody. And we've been in XYZ situations. Here's how we got back. We can do this again. And they just didn't get overshadowed by the moment. And I don't think they lost the belief that they won 64 games and no other team in the NBA came even close to that this year. Even if 64, like that's impressive, but that's not one of the like all-time great finishes. But the best team in the West, 2 of them had 57 wins. The Pacers, 47 wins is who Boston was playing. So I think there was still, without getting too cool about it like Minnesota did, there was that confidence to go, let's just keep doing what we're doing. They had excellent game plans too. You've got superstars, you've got star role players. Everybody was locked in and did their jobs, and they kept their cool instead of being too cool.
I just can't fathom how Indiana blew late game leads. What, three of these games?
Mm-hmm.
Three of the 4 losses were they had the lead late in the game,
and they didn't have Tyrese Halliburton for 2 of them, But
they were still up at the end of the fourth quarter, which means you should more often than not get to overtime. For example, I mean, granted, it was Halliburton that didn't put up his arms in an effort not to foul. Was it Tatum that made that 3 to send it to overtime? And then they were, what was it, in game 4? They were up, 2 or 3 with like 40 seconds to go or something like that. Like
at home. At home. No, not 40. There wasn't much time left. Yeah, they were up.
To me, like, I'd be losing my brain if this happened to the Knicks, right? Like, to know that you had big leads late against the Celtics in Boston. You had leads late, very, very late in the last 2 minutes against Boston in the other game, as well as in game 4, the clincher there for Boston. How do you not end up with one of them?
That's the great question. Indiana should at least have one. At least have one.
Like, game 1 should have been the game, minimum. Game 1 should have been the game. And I think what you said about Boston not panicking is about the cleanest way to describe it. Is that no matter what the situation was, they know who they are. They know they'll shoot a bunch of threes. They know they're a pretty decent defensive team.
Yes, they are.
They know they can get to a spot. They know they've got superstars on their side. And they know.
And their role players are all former stars themselves. That's the other big thing. Every single one of the role players, like of the starting group, is a former all-star.
You're right. And the vast majority of that group has been through this test before. They know that a team like Indiana is a young team, is a team that's going to go through ebbs and flows. They've got to muster the storm. And Indiana went through just long stretches of not being able to do anything. And it was...
Despite playing hard, I thought the Pacers played hard the whole time. It was that execution thing again.
I've gone through this thing. I've used this analogy before. When my friend and I would play racquetball, for whatever reason, I would lead him a lot of times late, but with 1 or 2 points to go, I could never get that last point before he would come back as someone who was just more athletic, someone who was just mentally, I guess, in a better spot to be able to handle situations like that, would always come back, and it'd frustrate the crap out of me. And that'd get into my head even more. It feels like. I don't know if that's the situation necessarily for Indiana, but it does feel like that once you sort of see Boston teetering on the edge of being able to beat them in this series. Because after game 3, it was kind of a foregone conclusion. I think most people thought that game 4, even though Indiana had not lost at home until game 3, that it was going to be a Boston thing. They played really hard and really tough. It's just when they needed the absolute nails moments at the very end of the game, they couldn't get them. They couldn't get inbound passes to work. And I'm going away from game 4 now at this point. They couldn't get inbound passes. Like they just gave away games. And it was
shots
really
were rushed, shots were flat.
It did kind of feel like that maybe that they may have been a little bit in their head. Like they were just struggling to get, like, one of these has to go. One of these has to go. If one of these goes, they were good. If one of these goes, we're good. And they just were a little out of sorts, and a little goes a long way.
I think you saw a little bit with Indiana, the same with Minnesota, that when things got tight, certain players, and not just the stars, but a lot of guys then start to go, oh man, I have to help us get out of this. So I'm going to play even harder. Sometimes that means recklessly and then not smart and out of the game plan. I got to take more shots. I have to be more aggressive because that's what everybody's told. And that's the cliche that you hear on every broadcast. Oh, so-and-so needs to be more aggressive. But then that means forcing shots that you don't normally take, or that you're not being patient to find that great shot. And you saw Minnesota devolve into hero ball in that 30-point loss, or what turned out to be 21 points, but it was 30 for much of that game. It was hero ball. And Indiana, during some of their worst times, devolved into that. But you'd feel a lot better with hero ball if the one guy capable of playing hero ball, Tyrese Halliburton, was on the court. Pascal Siakam is not a hero ball guy. Neither is Miles Turner, even if they're both, all-star, fringe all-star level. None of the other role players, Andrew Nembhard is the guy that I'll call out because he had a great series, but he's not quite to that point where you want Andrew Nembhard playing hero ball, and he had to do it a few times with Halliburton out, and we saw the results. So the bad news is I think their youth caught up to them, their inexperience caught up to them. The good news is, like with Minnesota, this is how you get that experience. It is the tough losses, the ones that stick in your craw for the rest of your career, that you learn something from. And the good news is the vast majority of this Pacers team is young, and they're going to be another year seasoned and entering their prime. And even somebody like Turner or Siakam, who's a little bit older at this point, they're not old, and they've been around the block enough, but they're still within the prime of their career. So Indiana's got a lot of stuff to build on. You hope that they're able to come back and actually build on it, that this isn't an Atlanta Hawks situation from like 3-4 years ago where they were so great, or even the Sacramento Kings last year. They catch everybody by surprise. They have a great season. Everybody talks all summer about how much better they're going to be, and then they come out and they lay an egg because people aren't surprised by them anymore. And, so that's going to be the big challenge for Indiana, is to actually build on this. Same thing happened to Minnesota last season. They pulled the Gobert trade, but they were coming off that fun year where they were ousted by the Grizzlies in the first round. It was a great kind of comeback for Minnesota. And then last year they really struggled too. So being a young team on the come up is fun. It's exciting. It's frustrating, and it can be dangerous also.
All right. So then the finals everybody wanted. Yeah. Boston, Dallas. What are your initial thoughts on it?
Dallas is playing fantastically.
They're hot. They're a hot team right now.
They hit a level I don't think any of us thought that they were capable of, but you've seen flashes of it over the last half of the season. Boston, on the other hand, I think they're going to get Porzingis back during the finals. How they deploy him and how much rust he has is a big question. But Boston has Drew Holiday, Jaylen Brown, Derek White, and even Jason Tatum. They got a lot of really good wing defenders that they're going to be throwing out there against Dallas. I thought the same thing about Minnesota, and it wasn't enough. So there is still the possibility that if Luka and Kyrie continue an all-time playoff run down the stretch here, that there's not anything Boston can do about it. Because I do think that Luka and Kyrie together is it's a more talented duo, a more dangerous duo than Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. I do think Dallas has the edge there in the star power. Role player wise, I think it's about even for both teams. They're both stacked. They've got a lot of depth. They've got a lot of guys who give you different looks, who execute the game plan, who do what they want. Dallas has become the new Lob City. Boston just has plug and play guys who keep that machine humming. So I'm going to go Boston in 6 because Boston, again, had the better record all year. They've lost one time in the playoffs so far, just once. They've got as much momentum as Dallas has, but yeah, Dallas is dangerous. Dallas is a true wild card where you go, this is a team that is peaking at exactly the right time, and they've got all the ingredients to be able to pull off one of these one-off championships that we see from, like the Raptors did a few years ago, whatever. And the Nuggets last year to pull a one-off on you. Dallas is capable of that.
Dallas has done it before. They pulled off.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, that team was better for a longer stretch of time, but finally broke through. But they've done this before where they broke through and they were the team that wasn't expected to beat Miami, and then they beat Miami. And you're like, wow, okay,
yep,
good job, Dirk.
When all the threes were falling, there was nothing you could do, and Dallas is capable of that for sure.
Yeah, I struggle with this one because Boston is the favorite. Dallas is a team I don't want to root for either. Neither one of these teams I'm a fan of right now.
For different, got too many teams you dislike this far into the playoffs.
Yeah, that's 100% of them. That's 100. Well, to be fair, I don't hate Dallas as much as a player on Dallas, and for Boston, it's the entire franchise.
This is a career-saving year, and we talked a little bit about this last week, but this is a career-saving year for Kyrie Irving. He's saved his legacy this year. He has saved his next contract, maybe even his next 2 contracts. He's going to get chances. This is just proof that even a guy like James Harden, there still is time. You still could put your head on straight and get this turnaround. Ben Simmons,
he's only 32.
You still could get this turned around, Ben Simmons. But it has to start with buying into something,
Kyrie Irving's only 32, and we were talking about how he was close to maybe mentally getting himself out of the game, just the way he was. But he's been, from everything I've heard, a good teammate this year, and clearly on the court that they're meshing pretty well. I think Boston's the better team. But I think Dallas is the more tested team this particular playoffs.
That is true.
But I don't. Well, I don't think this is the year for Dallas to get it done. I just don't want to say that out loud. I don't think this is a one-off year. I think Boston has been building toward this, and they've just been tweaking and tweaking and tweaking. And finally, probably be able to get Kristaps Porzingis back to be able to play in the finals. It's going to be a big step for them.
Even if you bring him off the bench, bring him off the bench in the place, that Luke Cornett was playing before he hurt his hand, and it's 20 minutes a game, and it's a little bit less of O'Shea Brissett and Xavier Tillman, that would still be a major benefit for the Celtics. And that's the route I would go versus trying to fit him back in the starting lineup.
I think I would lean Boston. Depressingly, I would lean Boston. First, I would root for a sinkhole to open up under that arena. The fans be okay. Some of the fans.
You just want the banners. You just want the banners to fall into the sinkhole.
Yeah,
that's mainly.
You can't reprint those. That's the thing. When they go, history goes. So, I think for credibility's sake, I lean Boston just to be able to be right. I don't think this is a long series, though. I think you push it. A 6 is pushing it. I'm with you. Okay. 6 is a push, but I think Boston. I think Boston's going to go 5, man. I think the guys, the team's old enough, been together long enough, been deep in the playoffs long enough, been in the finals long enough before that this is the place that they break through. They finally break through, and for the first time since 2008, they're holding the LOB. So
they've got 6 different players on that roster who have been all-stars or are capable of being all-stars still at this point in their career. And it's not a, super team type of setup because a lot of those guys have been all-stars that fit and filled a lot of gaps. They were not one-trick pony all-stars. Al Horford was always a gap filler. So was Drew Holiday. Derek White is a gap filler. And he's, been on Team USA before. Jaylen Brown in a lot of ways too. Yes, he can score, but he does so many other things. Jason Tatum is the only one that I look at where I go, that's a specialized superstar. Maybe Kristaps Porzingis, is more of a shooter, but he is a shot blocker too. So they're multifaceted. They're veteran. You made the point that Dallas has had the tougher run. That is true. Boston, they play an incredibly dinged up Miami team in the first round that just ran out of bodies. They play a Cavaliers team that wilted away in their series and had no bodies left by the time it was done. And then against the Pacers, yeah, they were without Ben Mathurin, but you lose Tyrese Halliburton for half the series too. That is such a huge, that's enormous, because that's the engine that, pun intended, drives the Pacers car. And they just don't have the star power otherwise. So you're right. Boston has had a lot of teams fall down hurt in front of them, whereas Dallas is going to come in about as healthy as you could be. Derek Lively dealing with the neck injury and the head injury. Maxi Kleba is not right yet, but he's playing. He hit a big shot against the Wolves in Game 5. So they've got just about everybody that they normally would have. And that's where I think Dallas is capable of winning a couple of games. That's why I'm picking this to be a 6-game series. But you're right. Boston, both on paper and from what we've seen all year, they've had that evidence to back them up until somebody proves otherwise.
And sadly, the Knicks don't get to do it. So there you go.
Neither
right.
do the Wolves.
Neither do the Wolves. Sad trombone for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
I
It was
guess
fun while it lasted, though, right?
It
was fun while it lasted. I'll take this over a 20-win season any day of the week.
Me too. All right, Joe, let's go do it for us. You say goodbye to the good people.
Goodbye, good people. If you want the video version of this here podcast, we are on YouTube, where you can like, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff. If you want the audio-only version, it's Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. This has been Basketball by Association, and we will see you in the NBA Finals coming up next.